Egyptian President Abdel Fattah Al-Sisi will meet with Emmanuel Macron at the Elysée Palace today as part of the Egyptian leader's three-day state visit to France. The two presidents are expected to discuss regional tensions, in particular the crisis in the Mediterranean related to Turkey. Human rights organisations say the French president should strongly press his Egyptian counterpart on human rights violations. Well, our international correspondent Annalise Borges is in Paris. We can go there now. Annalise, very good morning to you. What's expected then to be on the agenda when the two presidents meet today?
Hi there, Rosie. Well, Emmanuel Macron and Abdel Fattah Al-Sisi are expected to discuss a wide range of issues, including the public health emergency triggered by the coronavirus pandemic. France is set to loan 150 million euros to Egypt for it to fight against the crisis there, as well as a series of topics that you mentioned that are often touched upon when the two presidents meet: the fight against terrorism, the volatile situation in North Africa, specifically about Libya, but also the recent crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean opposing Greece and Cyprus to Turkey, as well as the war in Syria. So a long list of very complex topics for the two presidents to discuss. France considers Egypt to be a strategic partner in the region, a relatively stable country in a volatile part of the world. But as you mentioned there, this visit is quite controversial. Rosie, human rights organizations are up in arms, denouncing what they describe as a red carpet for the leader of a country with extremely poor human rights records. A statement by a dozen rights groups and NGOs said that France, and I quote, long indulged President Al-Sisi's brutal repression of any form of dissent. I spoke to a representative of one of the NGOs represented in that statement, who told me just how dire the situation is for human rights activists in Egypt.
In the name of the fight against terrorism, Egyptian authorities will repress any dissident voice in the country. Today, expressing a critical opinion in Egypt exposes people who end up being arbitrarily detained and placed in detention for months, sometimes years, without a trial. They normally land in front of a special court dedicated to the fight against terrorism and are then accused of infractions linked to terror without any proof and end up in prison for years in inhumane conditions. These are overcrowded prisons, and today with the public health crisis, we can fear the worst. And they end up being given heavy sentences, and let's not forget that Egypt still applies the death penalty. It's one of 5 countries that executes the most in the world.
Amnesty International and other rights groups are calling on France to exert more pressure on Egypt, saying it's not about national sovereignty versus foreign intervention. It's about international human rights, and both countries have made commitments about that. Rosie?
Annalise, President Macron has come under quite intense criticism, particularly in the Muslim world recently. Do you think they are likely to discuss Macron's fight against what he calls radical Islam?
Absolutely, Rosie. And interestingly enough, he can count on Abdel Fattah Al-Sisi as an ally in that fight. The former army general is a secular leader and has been fighting his own fight against political Islam in his country. He is one of the architects of the exit of the Muslim Brotherhood from power in Egypt. Of course, there are, as we just mentioned, a lot of concern with regards to just how he is waging that fight there. But they are certainly going to talk about the topic, especially because Egypt is one of the countries that trains and sometimes even hires imams to send to France. So this campaign that Emmanuel Macron now has been waging here in France against radical Islam is certainly going to be in the topic during an off-the-record briefing at the Elysée, the presidential palace. They didn't give much detail about just how the tone of that conversation, what kind of tone is going to be employed, but they said that that is certainly a topic of discussion of the two presidents. Rosie?
Annalise Borges, thank you very much, our international correspondent there in Paris.